Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. Hello, America. Thanks for listening. I am your host, Edgar Mills, and this is Episode 1, Paltering, Lies Within the Truth. All right, folks. So for this episode, I'm going to talk about a topic that a good friend of mine, shared with me that he thought he would like to hear about, or at least hear my thoughts on it. He introduced me to a word that I was not familiar with, and that word is paltering. I've never heard it before. I've never heard it used in any context from anyone I know or have read or seen on television. But I am, as I'm sure you are, very, very familiar with its meaning and its various uses. Paltering is defined by vocabulary.com as a trivial act of lying or being deliberately unclear. I think we're all very familiar with that. I did some research and I found a very notable paper written by a research team at Harvard Kennedy School, and it describes paltering in a little more detail and a little more nuance. It describes paltering as the deliberate use of truthful statements to create a misleading impression, like saying something accurate in such a way that paints an inaccurate picture. I think we all know about that. I think we've just spent the last 6 months, 8 months, year on a election cycle. And all you hear is paltering along with pandering, and the politicians, nobody does it better. So we're going to talk about paltering in three different contexts. We're going to talk about it from one I'm near and dear to, and that is the firearms training industry. And then we're going to talk about paltering within politics, specifically politicians and their need to lie constantly. And then finally, the most important probably is that we're going to talk about it in context of relationships, marital relationships, and inside your house. And finally, we'll wrap it up with what can we do to avoid the trap of needing to lie, or how can we figure out who is paltering when dealing with us. So let's get into it. First, I'm going to talk about the firearms training industry. Now, there are a few guys out there right now, top level guys, who have a knack for calling out, palterers, liars, embellishers, people who are delivering, for lack of a better word, nonsense to the general public and charging hefty fees for it. How do these guys palter? How do the people who operate these businesses, how do they palter? How do they lie to the general public? Well, one is in their own personal bios. Sometimes an instructor will have some fantastical bio that's 2 pages long, full of qualifications and places and agencies and such, that makes it seem like he's done on just all these things, all these Jason Bourne-esque things. These types of guys, they will allude to training with SOF or training with an agency and things like that. Folks, let me tell you, that can mean very many things, training with XYZ agency. So are they liars outright? Maybe not. There used to be a joke that the only thing that Air Force SOF had to do to be considered SOF was eat at the same chow hall with a Green Beret. So there's guys out there who, may have been MPs or who knows what, and they were on the same fob with some Navy SEALs or some CIA dudes, and that became a part of their bio. Now, how does that relate to shooting? It does not. It does not at all. So there you go. How do they palter in the delivery of their product? There's a company out here that has a course that is it's called something like Tier 5, advanced operator course, something, I don't know what. It's bizarre. It doesn't describe accurately what you're there to learn or what the purpose of the course is. I imagine they came up with their own tier system, and who knows what. I haven't trained there, so I can't speak to it 100%, but I can just give you my impression from reading the website and the bios, etc. So they sell terminology. They sell these fantastical ideas of you're somehow going to be doing operator things. I got news for you. The word operator is a very narrowly defined word within special operations. There is a course out there called the operator training course, and very few men have gone to it. I haven't. So be very mindful of people calling themselves operators. Now, I can't speak for the Marine MARSOC fellas. I think they call themselves operators as well. But at any rate, these trainers will sell fantasy. They will sell fantasy that makes it sound like you're doing some things that ultimately you're really not doing and have no need for anyway. Be mindful. Be careful of these guys. Be careful of these palterers. And then the same goes on the other end of the scale there when you got an NRA guy in his 60s or 70s, and he's teaching techniques and principles from, back when he was a firearms instructor on his agency in 1974. And he down talks shooting fast and things like that, and just simply doesn't keep up with the modern standards. Now, principles don't change very much over time, folks, but techniques change with the wind. And those dudes out there who are called operators, the real ones, they are usually pretty ahead of the game on techniques. So be mindful of these guys too. They used to be called FUDs. I think we're in a whole new zone of FUD now. So be mindful of these palterers who will tell you that competition will get you killed, or who allude to what kind of things happen in a gunfight, who may have never been in a gunfight. I think if you're going to talk about what it's like to be in a gunfight, there's probably a pretty good precedent that you should have been in a gunfight. And I got news for you. If you have been in one gunfight in your life and you survived it, that doesn't mean you did everything correct. So be mindful of that, guys and gals. Be mindful of people who are vague or elusive in their own personal stories and bios. And then specifically guys who won't perform in front of you, guys who don't demonstrate their drills and things like that. The firearms training business is full of palterers. All right, that's enough of that, guy. That's enough of that. Let's move on. We've just come out of a painful election cycle, folks. The campaigning was going on for a good solid year or more. And I'm not going to speak to the qualities or lack of for any of these politicians, but what I'm going to say is this: they all have one thing in common, and that's that they are professional palterers. A politician will tell you what you want to hear, no matter what. Now, this study that I cited earlier from the Harvard Kennedy School makes an example of politicians and paltering. And he referenced Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Now, he used a different reference than I'm going to use. My friend Tim used this reference, and I'm going to expand on it. When Bill Clinton was being questioned about the Monica Lewinsky incident, he famously said, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." He said that. And in that context, sexual relations, he was specifically referring to sexual intercourse. We all know that even though no actual intercourse happened, Bill Clinton got fellatio in the Oval Office. So did he tell an outright lie? Was it an outright lie? No, it wasn't. He didn't have sexual intercourse in the classic sense. He didn't have sexual relations in the classic sense. What he did have was debauchery, oral sex, and abuse of power while in the Oval Office. And that is a prime example of paltering, of telling a half-truth to misdirect. In modern politics, paltering is all up and down the campaign trail, in debates, in press conferences. Politicians will dodge answers like Neo dodging bullets in The Matrix, especially if you ask about controversial policies or policies that aren't expedient on the campaign trail, but are only in place for your base. They will shift to unrelated or imagined achievements. They'll use convoluted rhetoric. They'll shift the topic any way they can. All you need to do is look at any Kamala Harris interview during this campaign cycle. She's yet to give a straight answer to anything. So, will a politician outright lie? Yeah, absolutely they will. But in the modern day of internet and everything's being recorded at all times, they try to be more clever about it. Paltering is a technique that they use to do that. What are the negative effects when politicians palter? When it's uncovered, right? When they're found out, then that creates a significant loss of trust. Now, there's party diehards that it doesn't matter. You could essentially murder someone on television and still be good. But rational human beings, when a politician gets caught in outright lies, it'll break down the trust, right? The public, rational humans, they feel deceived and misled, right? And then it builds it shows that the politician has a lack of character and a lack of integrity. And rational humans don't like that. Rational humans don't like that. And then when the trust breaks down, then it begins to polarize communities. Politics, now I don't know if I could go back in history, it would be interesting to see, but politics seems more polarized now than it ever has been. It seems that way. And I could be wrong about it, but it seems very polarized. This polarization, however, can sway the outcome of an election big time. Look at what happened. Look at what happened this cycle. Undecided voters, independent voters, minority voters, they came out strong for the other guy this time. And that was due to largely in part for campaigning and the way they campaigned. Anyway, enough about politics, right? Politicians in general tell lies. They palter as a technique. They will tell half-truths. They will take a kernel of truth from their opponent and then create some fantastical, dramatic lie scenario that is meant to make you distrust their opponent. And that's what's been going on probably since there's been politics. But anyway, enough about it. We could talk about politics indefinitely. We could talk for 4 hours every night from now until we all grow old and die about lying politicians. What we're going to talk about next, and this is more important. This is the most important, in fact, of everything I've said so far. What we're about to get into next is the most important portion here. We're going to talk about personal relationships, right? Marriage, boyfriend, girlfriend, trust, paltering, lying, lies by omission. These are so destructive in a personal relationship. Trust is so delicate. If you've been married for 2 years and your partner comes home aloof and you say, hey, where were you? Where have you been? And the answer was, I was out with friends. Is that a lie? No, probably not. But what if after going out with friends and discussing life, they then stopped by the lawyer's office to discuss divorce without your knowledge? That's a pretty big example, pretty dramatic example of paltering, right? Oh yeah, hey, how you doing? I was out with friends, no big deal. And you're trying to set up a divorce with your husband or wife. Selective truth telling, that's essentially what paltering is, right? That will kill trust in a marriage. Paltering in a relationship comes from a desire to avoid conflict, maybe a desire to protect your partner's feelings, maybe just a desire not to be seen as the bad guy. Are those valid? Yeah, who knows? They may be valid to you. They may seem valid, but if you look at the big picture, the long term, then they're probably not. If you lie to your partner, sooner or later, folks, in the words of Johnny Cash, what's done in the dark will be brought to the light. It will come up. Sooner or later, you will be found out. If you're a serial womanizer, your woman will find out. Yeah, that's just it, folks. That's it. So, what are we doing here? When the truth resurfaces and divorce is imminent, all right, breakup is imminent because the damage is exponentially magnified versus just coming out with the truth early in the game. The breakdown in communication that comes from lying or paltering creates a negative environment, and that negative environment creates, well, it's a circular problem, right? You don't communicate, so you don't feel like you can trust the other person to communicate. And then when there is communication, it's lies or paltering or half-truths. And then it's just a vicious circle. And that vicious circle eventually will create bigger conflict and eventually emotional distancing, or the emotional distancing may come first and then the bigger conflict later. That's a big problem, folks. How do we catch it? How do we combat these little small forms of deception through paltering? As an individual to the other person, you need to be honest with yourself about things. That's number one. Don't palter to yourself. Don't lie to yourself about what you want and what your desires are versus what you're capable of or what your priorities are. That's more importantly, is what your priority. And then if your spouse is your priority, folks, then it's critical that we learn to I'm going to say this a couple of times here. Learn to listen carefully and pay attention. Learn to listen carefully and pay attention. Don't just listen to respond. I had a horrible problem with this. I still have a problem with this. It's work for me to fight through this. I always have an answer for everything, and I'm already ready to launch my response before I ever even hear the full sentence. That's bad, and that's something I'm working on in myself. But it's very easy to be that way, especially when you think you know everything. Listen carefully and pay attention. Now, don't just pay attention to what's said, folks. If your spouse or partner is a palterer, it's important that you pay attention to what is not said as well. There's volumes in what is not said. Palterers, liars, deceivers, they will dance around a subject. They redirect, misdirect. They will say anything but the truth. So look for that omission and look for key information that's being omitted. And how do you do that? Very simple. This is one of my favorite things to tell people is to communicate directly. Ask direct questions. Don't be vague. Don't be ambiguous. Ask the question that you want to get the answer to. And don't accept vague and evasive answers. That's it. Palter will try to avoid direct contact as much as possible. And if you do ask a direct question and you get sidestepped, follow up with more precise questions. precision, right? Precise, direct questions require detailed answers. And if you don't get them, then maybe there's something there. And then one of the things that the Junto podcast pushes is critical thinking. Be aware of your own cognitive biases, folks. Confirmation bias, for instance. If you're a woman and you suspect your husband is cheating on you, and you ask a question and he gives you an answer that you want to hear, and then you drop it, that's sort of a confirmation bias. He answered a question the way you wanted to hear it, and you accepted it. So be mindful. Ask the question. Now you got to be honest with yourself again. It's very important that you're honest with yourself first. If you don't want the answer to the question, then don't ask it. However, interest of openness and truth, ask the question and expect a direct answer to a direct question. Learn to be more open in your relationship. That's hard for some people. My wife and I have known each other, well, we've known each other since 1987. We've been going together, boyfriend and girlfriend, since 1988. And still, in that many years, it's still a challenge to be 100% open with one another. We've come a long way, folks. It's still sometimes a challenge to be open, completely trusting in your relationship. Now, I didn't help that any. I was a savage when I was young, and I'm not proud of most of the things I did up through my 20s. And the more open you are, then you foster an environment where honesty is valued and rewarded over, the temporary comfort of telling a lie that gets you out of trouble right now. So try to be open. Try to be open and honest with your relationship. Do a little experiment. Share something that you haven't before. It don't have to be like I murdered a guy one summer. It could be something small, just to test the waters. But chances are, folks, your spouse ain't going to let you down. Commit to transparency. And that's the openness and the transparency, right? Commit to it. And this will kill any false need to tell a lie. If you're comfortable, transparent, and open with your spouse, there's no need for you to mislead them, because you trust that they will respond accordingly, rationally. There may be some hurt feelings there, but the lies, it turns out, tend to hurt worse than the actual action itself. And then just educate yourself, folks. So either in public discourse or your personal life, just educate yourself. Understand deception techniques. Learn them. That will help you to spot out bullcrap artists. And if your boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse is misleading you. Paltering is just a technique. It's just a form of lying, but it's pervasive. It's a common form of lying, and it affects the political arena. It affects your personal life. It could even affect your professional life. If you're not 100% honest with your employees or your colleagues or your boss, the negative impacts are profound, folks, because they erode trust. And trust is about the most important thing out there. One of the most important things. So tune up your own personal awareness of deception and techniques to deceive. Tune up your critical thinking so that you can better navigate through the sea of liars. And whether you're holding politicians accountable or just nurturing honest communication in your own personal life and in your own house, the right answer, the antidote for paltering, I think, is direct communication and commitment, obviously, to the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. Direct communication and commitment to the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. So I'm going to leave you with two quotes, and they're kind of different. They're kind of either end of the spectrum when it comes to lying. One is Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, "If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything." And that's a little playful. It's a little simplistic, but it's 100% true, folks. It's 100% true. And then the other end of that perspective, I think it's credited to Carl Sagan. And he said, that which can be killed by the truth should be. Now, folks, I'm not advocating you go out and kill anyone. However, if the truth can bring it down, then it needs to come down. That's it, and that's all. That's pretty point blank. Think about these things, folks. Don't be a palterer. Think about your priorities. Prioritize honesty. Prioritize direct communication. I'm Edgar Mills. This has been episode 1 of the Junto podcast. I appreciate you guys listening. Please follow, please share, please like, please comment, and do feel free to send me your blog submissions or your suggestions to the juntopodcast.com, where you can be published on our website. And if you write truly compelling papers, then we'll highlight them as a topic of discussion here on the podcast. So once again, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next month with episode 2.